Hello, everyone, and welcome to JSA TV and JSA Europe, the newsroom for telecom and data center professionals across the continent. I'm João Marques Lima, and on behalf of the team here at JSA, thank you for tuning in to our second of three parts of our end of the year special broadcasting series. Today, we will be exploring how cutting-edge data centers are not only meeting the demands of the digital age, but also spearheading sustainable energy practices. We will look into myriad benefits and challenges offered by new energy sources and get a sneak peek into what the future holds for energy-efficient data centers and broad infrastructure deployments in the coming year. This is even more important with AI set to be top of mind and shifting client requirements forcing change on operations. With that said, it is now my pleasure to introduce you our exceptional executive lineup, which includes Louise Bunting, CEO of Carbon Net Neutral Technology Solutions, Anne Foster, Senior Director and Global Head of ESG for Keenbrook Infrastructure Partners, and Dr. Bella Wasra, CEO of Telehouse Deutschland and board member of the Climate Neutral Data Center PAC. Guys, thanks so much for making the effort of being here. It's nice to see you all again, and especially to discuss such an important topic to our industry in the age that we live in, really. To begin with, just to give a bit of background to our listeners and viewers, let's maybe get you to do a 30-second elevator pitch sort of introduction of who you are and what the business that you work for does for the industry. I'm going to go around the screen, so I'll start with you, Louise.
Thank you. I am CIO for Carbon Net Neutral Tech Solutions. We advise clients on carbon measurement and carbon management. Prior to Carbon Net Neutral, I was CIO for Yonder Group, which is a builder and operator of data centers. Prior to that, I was predominantly in financial services, working for the likes of KPMG and most of the UK major investment banks, predominantly advising on data centers, infrastructure and tech migrations.
And I have followed your work over the years, and I know it's quite throughout. And I remember the presentation we had in Central London, I think in 2018, which was quite amazing. And Anne, good to see you again.
Thank you.
And to you. Good to get to meet everyone on the panel today as well. So Keenbrook Infrastructure Partners, we invest globally across renewable energy infrastructure and energy transition infrastructure and businesses and technology solutions that support that. As part of that broader investment focus, we have many gigawatts of data centers that are under construction or planning across the US, the Australian markets. And our focus is primarily on supporting those data centers in their sustainability and energy transition solutions and endeavors.
It is quite an interesting portfolio of investments that you've done in the past 2 years, at least that I can remember of. But it's very, very interesting. And Bella.
Thank you very much. So Telehouse is one of the global colocation providers, fully owned by KDDI, the second largest mobile operator in Japan. And Telehouse has kind of 50 data centers worldwide. Me personally, I'm nearly 25 years in the data center industry. And recently, I joined the board of the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, a self-regulatory initiative in Europe to be climate neutral in 2030. And the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact has actually more than 100 signatories who are committed to our targets.
Very interesting. I mean, Telehouse, part of the KDDI group, one of the major players, and then of course the Climate Neutral Data Center PAC, a massive movement within the industry. And we know there's quite a lot coming up from the PAC next year. So we look forward to seeing the data that's going to be released. But then on with the questionnaire, really. The first question really becomes, how are the cutting edge data center technologies spearheading sustainable energy practices? So a bit of a general one to start, but to paint a picture of what's happening. So I'll open it to the floor, and who would like to go first?
I'm happy to start. First of all, the question is, what is an edge data center? Because everybody, from my point of view, has a different definition. Some call regional data centers edge data centers, which are not, for example, in Europe in the FLAP-D markets. For me personally, edge data centers are the very small data centers where latency is a must. And the sole purpose of an edge data center is to decrease the latency to the absolute minimum. For example, for smart cities, just as one example.
And then how would you say that kind of feeds that we're having? How do you bring energy to data centers serving the edge?
I mean, first of all, if you have thousands of edge data centers in a country, then you don't need so much energy, obviously, to transport the data from, let's say, Scotland to London, or from Marseille to Paris, or in Germany from Hamburg, Munich to Frankfurt. So that saves a lot of energy. And second, if you have thousands of these small units, then you don't need the same kind of redundancy, which obviously decreases the amount of energy you need to be always on, 99.9999%. And then it's not so important if every server works or not. So you just plug in a container-wise edge data center, and you don't exchange every single server if that breaks, because you exchange the whole container in a few years. So these are some of the topics where you have really sustainable energy practices.
And I mean, life cycle came straight to my head as a keyword as well, making things last a little bit longer. And how would you say data centers are kind of using sustainable energy resources in what they're doing? And maybe you can feed into what you're doing as well on the ground.
Are you talking about? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you go, Bella. You go, Bella.
No, go ahead, Anne.
Oh, no, sorry, you go. Sorry.
I just want to make sure that I did understand the question correctly. Are you still talking about edge or the existing data centers?
So data centers as a whole. So how are data centers making use of sustainable energy in this current day and age?
I mean, most of the data centers I know are buying power from renewable sources anyway. Sometimes they are simply buying certificates. But there are more PPAs, power purchase agreements, coming in place, which obviously then supports the construction of additional hydro plants, solar plants, wind plants. And because of the massive investments in the data center industry, we as an industry are pushing the build and construction of these additional sustainable power plants.
Okay, and let me bring that to you and see as well how you're doing there on the ground and the work that's happening.
Yeah, so every different data center is going to require a different solution. And that spans everything from your construction, your built environment, and sustainable energy practices that have gone into those materials and how you construct something, through to the design and planning of the data center itself. And that comes down to your HVAC, energy efficiency, all those different areas. Water supply as well, and bundle in there as well, because the two are so linked. As Bell's going to how you operate the data center, the latency allowances and those types of things, and the efficiencies in the actual working itself, and the long-term energy supply. So there are many different areas for each data center that, to look at it from a sustainable energy practices point of view, you're assessing each one independently to say, okay, what suite of solutions are going to fit this the best? And what we definitely see is that there is, where you often find the more cutting edge solutions, you're often looking at pilot centers, you're often looking at potentially early stage ones to roll that into operating kind of hyperscale data centers. It's a process. It's a process, to prove that they will, I guess, provide what is needed by the end tenant. We obviously, data center is an area that people rely on increasingly, increasing load, increasing expectations, increasing speed. So I think what's critical for people to remember when it comes to sustainable energy practices with data centers is there is that process from going from testing and piloting and assessing solutions right through. For direct sustainable energy supply, the holy grail is really to find 24/7 hourly matching. Obviously, that's what everyone's working towards. to get, plus your backup as renewable as well. That's an entirely, it's a whole additional feast as well. If you are a data center that does require backup, some few, but some don't require backup. And then it's a case of trying to piece that together. Now, in some situations, if you have access to hydro, if you have to have access to a decarbonised grid, if you have access to a heavily curtailed market, where otherwise that renewable energy being curtailed, you are in a slightly easier situation. For many data center tenants, what they're looking for is that trying to figure out that matching, that is a more sustainable energy solution. At the moment, the best one or the most available one is to match wind, solar and storage all together and try and piece that together into a 24-hour puzzle. But it's a challenge, and it's a big challenge depending on where your data center is, what the underlying available energy supply is, and what the markets look like. And I think it's what's really critical is that every data center is looked at in isolation to find the best solution for that data center, and on an energy and obviously the energy and water side, they work in correlation or inverse.
Yeah, I really like the balance that you bring around the 24-hour challenge, because it is a challenge. And I think that kind of segues into bringing Louise on the conversation as well, because we were just chatting about the challenges around all this, because we are an industry that likes to focus on the good. We like to focus on the green, on the green side of life. But there are challenges when it comes to renewable energy, to sustainability. Do you want to walk us through a little bit some of the major challenges that you're seeing in the market, especially within the European market?
So, I mean, wind always it's not always windy, and the sun's not always shiny. So unless you have access to hydro, it's very difficult to get 24/7 electrical supply from renewables. And on top of that is volume as well that you need to support. So there are challenges with renewables, but equally, when we go in and look at clients' data center supplies, we do test carbon density. So, and carbon density basically is a factor of renewable energy source to the grid versus fossil fuel production. And a lot of big companies have chosen to buy renewable PPAs, which actually doesn't really impact their emissions unless their source is truly from renewables, which is predominantly in Sweden, Norway, where you have access to hydro, and Scotland, ironically. So carbon density is a major factor. So I think if you have a renewable strategy, don't think just buying a PPA is the answer, because when we look at carbon measurement, we're looking at more than that. In addition to that, I think there is a bit of a misconception around latency and how many applications are latency sensitive, which means you could think very differently about moving your compute around to more locations that have access to 24/7 renewables. So I think there is a holistic strategy that, along with what Anne has mentioned, you have to have a variety of different renewable sources, but equally it needs to go up the stack, and you start spending more and more time with IT. And the best practices I've seen are where there is a lot more integration between IT teams and application teams, along with the data center provider, and that includes data sharing and other data around access to renewables in different locations, so they can physically or logically, move the workloads across. So you have where it is shining, you can actually access that renewable energy. So best practice I've seen are a lot more integration between client and the provider themselves.
A very quick follow-up question: are you seeing enough of that, or because we've been talking about collaboration for several years, but are we seeing enough, or are we still kind of going over walls to get it done?
I could talk to some of the stuff that we did at Yonder, where we did things like we exposed all of our real-time electrical data down to server level, actually, to clients. As a provider, that exposes all of our SLAs. So if we have a problem on site, the client knows about it instantly. We took the view that was actually being open and transparent, was absolutely 100% right. But what that allowed the client to do was basically analyze their entire estate and look for better consumption, smoothing out consumption across the estate, and also move those workloads around to areas where they've got excess supply of renewables. And that's when it gets really clever. So yes, we did it. I don't know how prevalent it is at the moment. Certainly, since I've been in carbon net neutral, we've not seen that level of data sharing. It's certainly not real time in most sites. And I think it's something that has to be thought about by a lot of providers. It is a cost, it's a commercial risk, but actually it's very much needed if we're going to start controlling carbon up and down the chain.
Yeah. If I had to bet, I would say it's not happening that much, because we know it's not an industry that likes to share too much. But what you mentioned actually about the applications, and I'll open the question to everyone, knowing what the application is used for, whether it should sit closer, further away from the user and all that, that kind of brings the conversation of AI, which is the key word of this year, into picture. So how are you guys seeing AI kind of affecting data center development from an energy perspective? Because these things are going to consume power like never before. Therefore, sustainability sources really become very, very important to this conversation, because we don't want to start building gigawatts of power based on fossil fuels. So we need to really get the journey going along with the renewable energy side of things. How is every one of you seeing that happening within the scope of your day-to-day work? And then, whoever speaks first goes first.
Again, like
Yeah.
Okay.
So before I'm coming to AI, may I mention that, for example, BMW and Daimler, they went to Scandinavia for their high performance computing stuff, especially design, some simulations, whatever. And in the case of Daimler, I know exactly that this consumes more power than the traditional office, whatever, ERP system, and so on. So there are companies doing that, going where there is sustainable power from renewable energies, like in Norway, like in Iceland, for non-latency driven applications. Whether AI is latency driven or not simply depends on what you want to do with that. And yes, I fully agree. We will see much more data center needs, digital infrastructure for AI. But I think that's the same we have now. Some of that will be latency sensitive, others not. And for everything which is not latency sensitive, we can go where we get power from renewable energies. And just from last remark to what Louise just said about solar and wind. Yes, it's not always windy. It's not always, the sun is not always shining. So what we need really is a kind of storage capability to store power whenever it's not windy, it's not sunny. I do get that stored power, but we need a lot. So a few batteries will not resolve the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is not just about keeping the lights on, literally the lights, not the whole data center on. You can store power for that, but not for the actual service. And what's your view on AI? Are we going too fast for the energy sources that we have?
First of all, I think we will have more need for data centers, not only because of AI, but because of more digitalization. I mean, if you look what happened in the last 10, 15 years with the breakthrough of the smartphones. Remember, the first iPhone came to the market in 2007. That's just 16 years ago. We haven't had tablets. We haven't had smartwatches. We did not know anything about Uber, Airbnb, and now we are using video conferencing as like never before. But there was no Teams, no Zoom, no WebEx, whatever. So there will be more digitalization, more need for digital infrastructure, and then in addition, we'll get AI applications, which obviously need a lot of digital infrastructure / data centers.
Yeah, absolutely. The technology is moving at the speed of light almost. And let me get you the same question. Do you think, are we going too fast for the resources that we have?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we are seeing currently is the ability for data centers to scale at the rate required by AI. A lot of the data centers are rapidly trying to make sure that they can put in place infrastructure that's needed. What goes along with that is then a demand for resources. So if you're looking for low carbon or more sustainable building materials, it puts an increasing demand on those resources, increasing pace of expectation of those raw materials to be provided. It puts increasing pace on the skills and the teams that are able to design and build sustainable data centers, and it also puts increasing requirements on the renewable energy sources themselves. And that's where we are seeing that where the hyperscalers and the groups that have that greater purchasing power, they are able to, I guess, create that at a faster rate, or partner with, groups like Quimbrook and, to support that build out. And I think it is going to be an area where there needs to be, a similar level of opportunity for, data centers aren't necessarily owned by the hyperscalers as well, which I think a lot of people are trying to provide. But it also becomes the cost there. There's a host of things that go along with that to try and get to those solutions. So I think AI in the pace is one of the biggest, areas that we're seeing. There's also different, redesigns of buildings, data centers that were going to be designed and now have to be changed in their planning and what's happening to try and, meet the specifications. So we've seen that to some extent. On the balancing side, though, AI is fundamental to being able to better control and dispatch energy. So when you're looking at battery optimization, when you're looking at long duration storage capabilities, other solutions that may help the energy transition or energy sustainability with data centers, AI is a supporting factor in being able to better optimize, better control dispatch of battery fleets or other storage, with long duration, short duration storage facilities in being able to control them. And the third area where we're really seeing it also come to light is in the ability to actually track and trace your carbon, is where people are talking about long duration, short duration storage, green hydrogen, whatever the storage solution is that various people are talking about in different ways, piloting. Each of them requires a means of actually tracking and tracing what the carbon intensity is for, and auditing that. For that to be useful in the industry. And it's one of the complications for data centers to be able to track and trace the carbon intensity of the various fuel sources that any single data center is going to rely on. Quimbrook has come up with its own tool, QuinTrace, in order to do that, across our portfolios. But that is, that's one area that is supported by AI and will increasingly be supported by AI. That is going to be helpful in, be it consumers, be it data centers, be it providers, in understanding when and where is, are more sustainable measures needed, and how can we meet, those demands better than maybe we are today.
Yeah, I think you raise a lot of valid points there, because AI is part of the solution, doesn't have to necessarily be part of the problem, especially when it comes to monitoring. But actually, on a side note, what you said about redesign as well, I was at a conference a few weeks ago in Toronto with Structured Research, and I was amazed because we know Meta went back to the drawing board with some of their projects, but I was amazed how much redesigning is going on in the industry itself. And it is a 6-month cycle now. If you haven't broken ground yet, if you haven't started getting your walls up, you will go back to the drawing boards if you're a few months delayed or something. One company had to redesign twice. Another one was redesigning for the first time after 6 months of having the plans done. I found that fascinating, something that I think we I don't know if we missed it on a larger scale, but I think it's happening everywhere. And people are becoming more comfortable about talking about it. That was just a side note. I'm just diverging now, but let me bring the question to you as well, Louise, about AI and your views. And we will talk about carbon monitoring more in detail as well in a second. But just give us your general view of AI versus sustainability.
So I think what's interesting about the high density compute, which is, Bella's hit the nail on the head actually around the fact that there's a proliferation of digitization. It's not, AI has been around for years, right? Probably all of us have got it deployed in one way or another, something that we use. But it's the necessary compute to do high levels of transactions on AI, and that is a particular problem for data center providers. And that redesign element that Anna's mentioned is difficult in legacy data centers. So unless you're building modular data centers, which ironically is a more sustainable way to build, so you're building as you need it, you're probably going to have to redesign every 2 years as a minimum, because quantum compute will come in again, will be with us in probably 4 or 5 years, and that's another redesign, a complete change. So it is about creating flexible spaces, and AI is one such technology which is forcing that at the moment, but there will be others, and they will change. I think, as Anna's mentioned, AI can be useful around predictive and analytics and give you really clever analysis up front around what's going on in your environment. So most providers are probably using it one way or another, and there is a really good application for the technology. But equally, AI is not the answer for everything, right? You need to have automation and probably robotics and a whole bunch of other things to make things really much more efficient, and that can reduce costs. So, but I think moving to different cooling technologies, so you're using chip-based cooling, and improvements actually designing the data center will have an impact on power draw. And equally, I was on a conference a couple of weeks ago actually with the CIO of Sainsbury's, or the ex-CIO of Sainsbury's, and he was saying we're really bad at shutting things off. We bring lots of new things in, but we don't actually turn things off. And I know when I did UBS data center exits, we turned off 20% of the applications because we left the data center. So I think there is a life cycle piece here in the way that IT is managed, that we shouldn't just be introducing new stuff. We need to be shutting stuff off as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, and I think sort of relates to it a little bit. I remember in 2015 when I started getting into the industry, there was this report that came out that 30% of the world's servers are ghost servers. They're online, they are running, they're wasting energy, but nothing is happening within them.
Not doing anything, yeah. And equally, traditional disaster recovery techniques, all of that, you're running your sites inefficiently, but that's an IT problem. Data centers are, the more information they provide, the more data they provide to the IT teams, the more active they can be with looking at their environment and being a lot more aware of the carbon that's being used. And as Anna's mentioned, sharing carbon data and being able to see that is critical, and that's necessary to go up and down the stack and make the data centers themselves more efficient, because the IT is being run efficiently.
Okay. I think from what the three of you just said, I think another word that comes to mind is flexibility. I think that's going to be very important on how things are built going forward. So just out of the blue, just can we talk about how can you be flexible in this day and age? How can we be flexible about budgets with all the demand that we have? How can we be flexible when we have to redesign facilities every 6 months if we haven't built them, or every 2-3 years if we built them? Because predicting things is becoming harder and harder and harder. So how do those things that have been usually very static around strategy, business plans, budgets, how do we flexibilize that a little bit more for an AI world? So I don't know if this is something you guys can share some lights, but just your thoughts on flexibility.
I mean, a data center is a real estate, so per definition, not so flexible, to be honest. And whenever I design a data center, then I need a building permission in most countries, which decreases the scale of flexibility tremendously. Because if I want to increase, for example, power and cooling density in the data center, I need to install more equipment, which means that I need to redesign all my electrical mechanical infrastructure, and that will impact in most cases my building permission. So I think if you don't put in the flexibility in the design from the very beginning, it's very difficult.
That's interesting. So it's really from the get-go. And any views on like how to be flexible from an investment perspective?
I mean, what we do is, and this is true for Telehouse and all other competitors, we do build out in modules. We don't put the 5 modules in one go and then we sell only one and we are left with the 4 others. We build step by step. This gives us flexibility whenever something changes. On the other hand, the typical life cycle of a data center is 25, 30 years. So nobody knows what will be in 25, 30 years. If I remember the beginning of the colocation industry, which is 25 years ago, 98, was the liberalization of the telecoms. We were talking about power densities of 500-600 watts per square meter. That was nothing. I mean, now we are talking about 5 or 10 times that power density in a modern state-of-the-art data center.
Yeah.
However, there's something which will change a little bit the game. If we are talking about, for example, the new energy efficiency law in Germany or the energy efficiency directive on an EU level, in Germany, there's a request for new data centers to have a PUE of 1.2. 1.2 means it's very difficult to achieve that with air-cooled servers. And that will change the design of future data centers in Germany to liquid-cooled servers, which I think is a good way forward. The same is true for existing data centers in Germany. They have to achieve 1.5, 1.3. And talking about the climate-neutral data center effect, we've committed ourselves to the certain PUE thresholds in warm and cold climate. That means some of the old existing data centers need to be completely redesigned, and I believe they will be shut down, redesigned completely, and then reopened. So that will change the game.
Interesting. And from an investor perspective as well, what's your view around the topic?
Yeah, so every time we're looking at investing in data centers, it is one of the key questions that's asked: is if we are in a situation where this essentially has to be redesigned in some way, refitted, what does that look like from an investment perspective? In practice, though, you're always designing these data centers with the tenants, and those tenants are on the expectation that they're going to be there for the 20, 25, 30, 35-year life of the building. So it does differ slightly. I mean, it differs a lot to I guess, the standard real estate asset class, but it does differ in that perspective where it is really it's a co-design with the tenant. It is not building that then someone moves into. It is very much built for purpose and built to the designs that the tenant requires. So they're also constantly moving forward, and I think one look forward is the technology aspect and saying, okay, what is a data center fundamentally going to look like from an operational equipment kind of mechanism in the future? And the other way is to also look at it from a decarbonization or regulatory perspective and say, what are data centers going to need to be doing in 5 or 10 years or 2 years? And therefore, what we are always aiming to do is to then future-proof that as much as possible, maximising the energy efficiencies, maximising water conservation, any areas where there could potentially be additional risk. I think the data centre industry is very keen to minimise that, minimise the overlay of regulation and not be forced to a point of regulation by actually taking the initiative to get it done first. And so that's one of the key areas of that future-proofing. Is to design those measures as much as possible. I mean, backup is one of the ones where I think a lot of data centers know they're going to have to shift at some point. And that's often built into the investment case where there's the assumption that for 5 or 6 years, it's going to rely on one backup, and then there's a switch potentially at some point in time. Other data centers aren't looking at that switch out from a CapEx perspective. It's really from I guess, identical fuel switch out. Where there are some instances where you're saying, okay, well, how can we switch out the fuel without actually having to switch out the equipment or the capital, the CapEx that goes into it?
Very interesting. And Louise?
Well, I think you've got to simplify everything. I'm going to be contentious here because we've been over engineering every layer of IT for years: data centers, infrastructure, and apps. And we had an interesting one because Yonder actually supplied hyperscale clients, but we knew their that some of the clients' self-build sites were a lot simpler in their design than ours were. And we were, because of the nature of SLAs and the way that we were being commercially sort of compelled to do things, it was completely over the top for what was needed actually, and what was being done by the client themselves. So there is a I think we have to present options to clients to simplify the environment. And I know when we presented eco options, for example, and explained things in a different way, it had a different impact on client decision making. And the only way you're going to build in a simpler way is to do that, I think.
Interesting. I think because we're almost getting to the end. Sorry, was someone going to say something?
Louise's point is one of the most valid ones. Is sometimes a case of what do you not build? What do you do less of? Where can you simplify? Where can you cut things out? It's one of the most critical things. Sorry.
No. I just don't want to interrupt because we want you guys to talk. So, no, that's cool. I was going to ask. I think we're reaching almost the last 5 minutes, but I was going to ask around the clients' needs that have been shifting. They have been shifting, but how much have they been shifting? What have they been shifting towards to? I mean, maybe I'll start from you, Louise, and then I'll end up with you, Bella, and then I think we might close at that point. We'll see if we've got time for another question.
Carbon data. Oh my gosh. If data center providers don't know their embodied carbon from their build cycles and can't provide ideally real-time data on the electrical consumption at a very granular level, now they will have to in the next 3 or 4 months, because or possibly by the end of next year, because pretty much everybody's on a carbon reduction journey, and data is key and a USP at the moment, but will be mandatory soon.
Interesting. Anne?
Definitely agree with Louise. It's the transparency around carbon, and that extends all the way from supply chain right through to end of life provisions and how that's being catered for. That's a client need, and on top of that, then it's the technologies and solutions that enable that to be improved. That's where we're industrials in built environment, in HVAC solutions. That's where we're definitely seeing some of the biggest areas of focus and need.
Okay, interesting. And Bella?
Yeah, the main need of our clients is availability, redundancy, resilience, and that did not change in the past 10, 15 years. And I think it's even more important than it was 10 to 15 years ago. However, in addition to that, I fully agree with what Louise and Anne said. It's now, in addition to that, availability, always on, it's sustainability, it's reducing carbon footprint, etc. So the challenge for us as operators became even more difficult.
Okay, I think we time manage this very well, so we do have time for one more. Just final question. So are we confident that data centers will be green or very much more sustainable, 100% sustainable by 2030? And what is the one thing that's lacking in the processes, in the strategies, in the investments they are seeing in the market? What's the one thing that's missing? And are you confident we're going to achieve the goals that we've set ourselves for 2030?
I'm going to say action. There's a lot of talk. There ain't much action. And if we're going to change, and 2030 is not far away, there has to be more action, and not just pledges and commitments and discussion groups, but actual action.
Yeah, we are about 20 quarters away, something like that. So it's not that far. And yeah, sorry. Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay, no.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest areas that's lacking is, I think it's not always lacking, but there is that need to support the technologies and the solutions that are going to get data centers to where they need to go. There is a lot of, as Louise has said, there are a lot of headlines out there about things that are being done, which can then also create a false sense of what's possible. We all know a battery fleet cannot support the data center at this point in time over the long term, but that makes a lot of headlines. There are other things. So I think that level of honesty as to what is really feasible right now and what do we need to invest in to drive other solutions, or pilot other solutions, prove up other solutions, whatever it is, to get them to the point where the data center industry is able to use them while not sacrificing on uptime and other things.
Interesting. And Bella, final words.
Yeah. So I mean, the main energy we use as a data center is obviously power. And in order to be climate neutral, we do need power from renewable sources. And we've discussed that earlier, that solar and wind is not always available. So what we need is the support from the countries, the politicians, the energy providers to do more, to build more, and as mentioned earlier, to have big storage systems where you can store all the solar and wind energy for times where you don't have sun and wind.
Interesting. It's all about the flexibility, the integration, more conversation, and bringing the other parts of the industry, so the energy guys as well, into the conversation more often, which are often so overshone. Even at conferences, that's the easiest way to see they're actually not involved in the conversations. When you go to a conference and they're not there. So that's very interesting. But because I think this is all we have time for today, and I mean, we could have gone down the route as also of nuclear power, hydrogen, but I think we're going to leave that for another time. With that said, I mean, thank you so much for all of you for making time to talk to us. And on behalf of the speakers, I would like to thank everyone for tuning in either here or LinkedIn, YouTube, X, or JSA.net. Our next session will take place in a week's time on November the 15th at 3 p.m. UK time. And we'll delve into how private equity-backed platforms, greenfield and brownfield developments, real estate, and M&A will shape Europe's digital infrastructure deployments in 2024. So make sure you visit our LinkedIn page to sign up for November the 15th. And with that said, we wrap up today's conversation. Look out for the playback of this session coming to JSA TV, YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and more. And from me and the team at JSA Europe, happy networking.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.